Again, thanks for joining me for putting pips on the ground. I'm going to rattle through here just so I keep anybody who's watching remotely online and in sequence here. Putting pips on the ground, I built this program really as an intentional way to convey to managers and leaders in different organizations that pips aren't necessarily the answer. They're not necessarily the answer to solving your people woes. Yes, they live out there. They breathe out there. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. But if we can start to minimize these, then there's real change that's in front of us that we can dive into. The problem with PIPs, my humble opinion, and I know other people share this, some may disagree, and that's okay. I'm not here to say that there's an absolute to this, but they don't work. PIPs don't work. They don't solve the problem. They don't get to the root of the problem. They end up being these tools that we've been accustomed to implementing. Typically this time of year, you hit October, November, as the holidays start rolling in, end of the year, Q4 sort of mentality. And we use them as a leveraging tool to try and instill and motivate people to do things. And the fact is, they don't work. So let's go through some definitions just to make sure that we're on the same page here. PIP, meaning performance improvement plan. This is Sherm's definition, basically paraphrasing a little bit, but it's a formal document that gives clear documented goals, timelines, and specific support to correct ongoing performance or behavioral deficiencies. To me, the language of a performance improvement plan seems to hint at the notion that we're trying to help people improve, when the reality of things is that this is a mechanism to fire somebody. The employee knows it. The manager knows it. We as HR professionals know it. And so as we look and see and move forward in this landscape, we have to think about what are PIPs to the organization. Absolutely, they're a way to protect you from legal action. Sure, if that's what you're after, if you're worried about somebody suing you, newsflash, they're going to sue you anyway, right? They're upset. They didn't get communication. This is all a big giant surprise. They think it's a farce. And those folks that are going to come after you are still going to come after you, whether or not you go through this process. They're going to shout from the mountaintops about how they were wrong. So in this proverbial electronic environment, I want you thinking about, if you're in a live room, the raise your hand is more of a example. You understand figuratively in this virtual environment. It's a little harder to do. Sometimes there's a little gesture thing that you can use. But if you think about how many of you have actually implemented a performance improvement plan, a PIP, right? Think about that. There's usually, I would say, 40 to 60% of any given HR audience that has gone through this. Now, when we consider how many people have had that employee beat the PIP, meaning successfully navigate that very, very particular language, meaning you're going to do X and Y and Z, and there's usually 4, 6, 8 check marks in that list in and around certain timeframes. Otherwise, you may face, here's the lovely language that we love to lean on here, up to and including potential further disciplinary action, up to and including, I used up to and including twice, up to and including potential termination of your employment. That's really motivating. When you're talking about an improvement plan, I want to help you improve. That's not the language that belongs here, right? How many of you still have that employee? Some of you, yes. There are some people who get through this and the PIP is written well and used in the right mechanism. Most often it's not. When you think about the statistics around performance improvement plans, 10 to 20% of them are successfully completed. So for you and the masses that have gone through this and you've been successful with it and you've saved the employee and they've been there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, congratulations. I give you all kudos. You've done some things right. The managers have been trained the right way, but that's not most of you. 10 to 20% of the employees on PIPs successfully complete them. What does that mean, right? It means that they were either designed poorly or the person wasn't set up for success. the goals and outcomes of that performance improvement plan weren't set for that person to succeed. Yeah, there is certainly a part of this that is on them. And there are some people who need to go through this process, again, to protect the organization. But by far and large, it's not most people. There's a place where the managers can intervene. So if you think about the costs of these performance improvement plans, you as the HR person, you're the one who's spending probably the most time here. The manager's time, right? Documenting, explaining things, gathering evidence, writing up things, back and forth with you they go. And how long does that take to get to the point where you can say, all right, I feel like you, manager X, have all your documentation in place. It looks like you've had conversations. You've told me that you've had these emails and they've taken it seriously and haven't improved. And we've given them benchmarks, sort of the written notification type of process. One step, 1, 2, 3, 3 strikes, you're out, sort of combination of things. How long does that take? It's not a blink of an eye. It's several conversations, several emails, several performance reviews looked at, and lots of documentation along the way. And then on the backside of that, this manager has to go and micromanage this employee throughout this whole process. Yes, some of them need it. But is that the best use of time when we could have done something else? There's a loss of productivity that also occurs here, not only by the manager, because they're sucked into this. You're somewhat sucked into this as the HR professional, the employee, their teammates, anybody in and around them. There's a drama piece. People know what's going on. They understand when somebody's struggling and they're not performing to high standards. Whoever's at fault, maybe a little bit of everything, and that's usually the case. But there is a morale piece that kicks in here. And if you have this land on somebody that's thought of favorably or has been doing well for a long time, and all of a sudden, poof, they hit a rut. Well, that morale piece really kicks in when you lose a fan favorite, if you will. That has a drastic impact on employee morale and productivity overall. Right. So think again in that mindset of proverbially raising your hand. Did the performance improvement plans that you implemented, I say work, did they save the employee? That's the intent. Create an environment where this person can succeed. Yes, no, or no. It may have even caused more damage, which is the most likely scenario, right? The person didn't succeed, and the ripple effects of somebody leaving or being pushed out at the end of the year, that has an impact on folks. They realize that even though you say you're about the people, you cut them loose right before Christmas or right before Thanksgiving. Not very festive, when you could have been having conversations all along. The point I'm trying to make is these PIPs are planned poorly, they're executed poorly, they don't work. You're flushing time and money down the drain. There it goes, in that swirl. And if you're on the other side of the world, then it's going the other direction. But you get the point. You're spending money hand over fist on something that doesn't work statistically. So why are we spending time there when we know it has a low efficiency rate? I'm going to walk you through a couple of things, right? So I'm going to give you some context in a different example and give you an idea of what this looks like in real time with some different examples in terms of how can we better instruct and inform our audience on how to do things more effectively. What you see in real world scenarios is that managers tend to give instruction, not context. Managers need help with things. A lot of times, I know many of you have this person in your organization or several of them. They're promoted because they were really good at being an individual contributor. They have the right mindset. They're eager to perform, but they haven't learned the skill of managing and coaching and developing people. And we're doing a poor job at helping them along the way. So in this example, I want to bridge this concept. I've got a bag of Legos here. You can sort of see it in the image here. There's a bunch of different pieces in here, and I'm going to show you in a live format. This is a lot more interactive. In the virtual format, we're going to walk through some photos that I took of kind of piecing some of this together. So I have this task. We're going to build a bridge, right? And so we're going to use some Legos. I have these little kits. And so you start with what looks like a pile of Legos, and I ask participants, I have usually a couple of volunteers that will step up. I ask them, hey, let's build a bridge. What does that look like? We'll walk through giving them the bag, I don't give them any other instructions other than build me a bridge. And so here they are interpreting, all right, I've got a platform, I've got some long pieces, some short pieces, some fat pieces, some skinny pieces, all sorts of different pieces. You can see them in the pictures. And as we go, they start building at what looks like one side of the bridge, and they're starting to climb and build some support structures. And as they continue to go, all right, here's a foundation of one side that seems to be building up. So in Lego world, somebody could cross over the bridge. And as we go, now we've got another side that we're building up, and we want to connect the two pieces. And ultimately, you get a very simple, rudimentary functioning bridge. Nothing that you or I are going to stand on, but for our example purposes, we gave them very simple instructions. Take the Legos, make a bridge. All right, very, very good job. I appreciate what we're trying to do here. In this next example, what I've instructed folks to do is, all right, let's get some help involved. Still same set of instructions, build me a bridge, but you have some help and support. Not a lot, but you have an extra set of hands and some more tools, we'll say, right? You have some more Legos. You can see the pile got a little bit bigger, but now you've got more hands involved. And so you've got some bigger bases, still have some of the same starter pieces along the way where this person's starting to build two sides. And how am I going to marry them together? And how am I going to put these two pieces together and connect them? Well, here, because you've got more Legos, more pieces, it's going to be a bigger structure. You can see over in the right image, there's actually a little column. So if you think of your cities that have rivers and you have those bigger bridges, there's a support structure in the middle to help hold everything up. And so these two helped. I see these two. One of those is my hand. Let's be real. You can see they're handing pieces back and forth and helping each other out. And there's some discussion going on about how do we build this, right? And so you can see the structure getting bigger and bigger and different pieces coming into play. So now you've got some pieces that are cutting across from one side to the other, touching that middle support structure, and eventually turning into what's in Lego world, it's a bridge. Back when I grew up, you didn't have all the fancy drawings of this and that and the other. You just had to build a structure and you had fun with it. But you can see now we've got some platforms, so we've got a surface to walk across. And eventually we've got a working, functioning bridge that's a little bit more usable from a Lego standpoint, but this is the combination of support that comes along with it. So you gave some very basic instruction. You gave them somebody to lean on. And the two of them pieced together what they thought was a good bridge. Here's the thing, though. That wasn't the bridge that I was thinking of. And I say this very much aware that this is a misleading example. But a lot of times, what we try to illustrate for folks, we make assumptions about what we're trying to get across. I want folks thinking about the same things and being on the same page, and we lose so much in conversation, in context, because we don't explain things fully. We make assumptions about what we think the other person should know. Yeah, we're still talking Legos. It's a Lego guitar. Kind of fun. I sort of wish I had one. It'd be kind of neat. It'd be really neat if it actually played music. But in this example, we went to the right bridge and they were totally off. They did a good job, but without good instruction and good context, how successful are they going to be towards my expectations? This Lego guitar is that example of that unrealistic expectation. I'm going to add all these 16 things that I know you're never going to hit in your performance improvement plan because it's unrealistic. And a lot of times, right, I'll walk through a couple examples further on that'll give that down to the T. All right, so I'm going to go to a different example just to kind of walk through this. What's a beat, right? So I'm going to tilt my camera here just so you can see a little bit. I've got these bongo drums, right? So we're going to use those. A beat, right? Just simple. If I ask somebody just kind of give me a beat on these things, they're just going to pound away and tap at these bongo drums, right? So my first example is what's a beat? Give me a beat. Very simple. That's showing me a beat, right? And so I can give you this, and that person is doing what I'm asking them to do. They're giving me a simple drum beat. They may pound away and be a little playful and pretend like they're listening to Bob Marley or something like that out in a Caribbean island and, listening to some fun Caribbean music and so forth. But without me giving you very specific examples about teaching you what I'm referring to, And I'll give you this example. Bongos. I looked this up on the internet. I don't just have these things, I actually fiddle around with them. I'm going to give you the context of how teaching and explaining things way more in depth gives you a better result. So in case you didn't know, bongos have two main sections to them. There's this outer rim. You can sort of hear this ringing sound. And then there's a thud middle zone, right? So you have the outer zone, inner zone. And you also have two different hats here. One smaller, and they have a little bit different tone. And hopefully you're picking that up, right? And so you can actually get into the middle zone here, and you're using 3 fingers. And so when I'm asking somebody to give me sort of a rhythm type of feel, I can give them better instruction. I can say, use the outside, or I can say, use the inside on one while you're using the left one. Right. And so as I keep going here, you get an example of better detail, more context of what I'm doing, and maybe some music would give you a little bit better feel for that. When you think about, how do I give you the good example of, I want you to play me a specific beat played around an 80s song that's going to follow along, some lyrics, then they have a little bit better example. And so I can, normally in an audience session, I'll grab an 80s fan. They usually will grab onto this little riff here, and it's only a couple of lines. So cover your ears, if you will, but it'll give you a good example here. Well, I remember, don't worry. How could I ever forget? It's the first time, the last time we ever met. But I know the reason why you keep your silence up. No, you don't fool me. The hurt doesn't show. The pain still grows. No stranger to you and me. So you can see there, a little bit different context. Bad singing aside, gives you a much different result. If I'm giving you context on what I'm after and explaining the point that I want you to tie into an 80s music piece, some people are going to get it because I gave them more instruction. That's what we need to do with our leaders, right? We witnessed poor example, poor guidance versus very contextual information along the way so that they're better prepared for things. And that's what we need to do with our managers these days. They're not prepared because we're not preparing them. We're not giving the skills, the tools, and the resources, right, to perform well. Because at the end of the day, the root of performance issues from the employee, from the manager, come from skill, right, lack of it, will, maybe they don't want to, part of that's on them, part of that may be the manager not striking the right chord with them. There's 2 pieces at play here. When I consider the factors involved in an employee's performance, the manager absolutely is responsible for some of that. Not 100%, but they have as much skin in the game as the employee does. It's part of the hiring cycle, part of the onboarding cycle, and part of the continued development that a manager has as part of their responsibilities in growing their team. It's not just make sure everybody answers 73 phone calls a day, or makes 16 drawings, or manages this project load of X million dollars, and so forth. There's a people development piece that comes with leadership. There's a capability component as being part of the performance issues. Is this person capable? Have I trained them? Have I developed them? Have I gotten them to the point where they have the tools and resources to do the job in the manner in which we're expecting them to? And do they feel safe asking for help? Those are all pieces here. There's a training and communication component that goes along with all of this, right? And managers have a big stake in that. And I will reinforce that piece of this. Management has a huge part to the root cause of performance issues. And if we don't recognize that, call that cat out on the carpet, we're missing the boat. The good news is there's something we can do about it. When we think about the tools that we're not giving managers, we're not helping them with things like how to manage and tune into attendance issues, how to handle conflict amongst employees, between the manager and the employee, or even in between the 2 employees. Sometimes there's some natural inclinations to people being able to diversify or split up the conversations and keep people at bay. but it's not a natural thing. Not every person that's promoted into that supervisory management director role has that people skill. Maybe along the way, they managed one or two people that they were friendly with and had a little bit better rapport. But with folks that are brand new to them or jumping into a new team, they may have done it before, but how successful were they? Good things to think about in the interview queue, which is a different presentation altogether. But we're not giving them the practice and the guide rails on how to adapt their style and approach. Yeah, you can give them all the DISC assessments you want, but if you don't teach them how to use those skills and help them practice them, then that DISC assessment was a big fat waste of money. We've got to teach our managers how to teach, how to guide, and how to coach our employees earlier in the process so we can avoid these performance issues, avoid the conversations. Because what happens is we as HR professionals dive into these conversations and we're sitting down with Joe, the manager. We're saying, Joe, you've got an issue. You got this employee, has this performance issue, and these things keep coming up. I want you to start weaving this into your conversations, and you give them some examples of what that language looks like. What does Joe say? I got it. This is great because it's just coming off the World Series. If you notice, there's a Dodgers banner up there in the back behind my head for you baseball fans. You'll get it and you'll appreciate that, unless you're a Blue Jays fan. Sorry. But you've got this baseball player. He's saying, I got it. But two things here. The ball is not in his glove. I think Aaron Judge from last year in the World Series. His eyes are actually going to the right side of the screen. He doesn't even have full concentration on that ball, right? He doesn't really have it. He thinks he does. That's what happens when we have these conversations and we're not getting validation. This is a communication exercise and a communication lesson for us all. Just because somebody says they got it, that's not always true. Show me that you've got it. Let me role play with you in that conversation. Let me play the devil's advocate. Maybe I play the employee in that situation. How does that person respond? They're going to think it's hokey. I promise you. But it's necessary. When you were in grade school or middle school, I don't remember whenever we all read Romeo and Juliet, we all had to take different parts and the teacher had to kind of guide us along. A little more passion, a little more anxiousness, a little bit more to be or not to be in those conversations. They had to help us along, and we lost track of that somewhere. So we'll dive into a little bit of the research pieces, and some of this, if you look in the right side of your tool set on this webinar, you're going to see resources, and in there's a worksheet. And I'm going to jump into that. And some of the notes going forward, you're going to see some text-heavy slides. These are in there, and I'll point out those when we come across. So in the research around performance, there's this guy, Doug McGregor, back in the 60s, wrote this piece about theory X and theory Y. Theory X meaning employees disliked work and they preferred to be given marching orders, more or less, meaning they wanted to be a drone. That's how I interpret that. They want to be told what to do. Let me go do that, and I'm going to punch in and punch out and do exactly what I'm told, 9 to 5, and see you later. Great. On the other side, there's theory Y. Employees are intrinsically self-motivated. They enjoy responsibility and problem solving. Again, this piece is in your handout. They're capable of self-direction and control. This is so true in today's world. We think about our generational conversations that we're having about Gen Zs and eventually the Gen Alphas. They have this self-motivation. We don't know how to communicate with them the best way in a lot of cases, but they want to be told what to do, not how to do. They want to solve some of these things. And so this theory Y really comes into play now really nicely, especially when we're talking about performance. If we can help people solve things, this applies both to the employee as well as the manager that we're trying to prep for these conversations. Employees are self-motivated. They want to succeed. We need to help our managers teach them how to succeed in a different way than our manager learned. There is a difference, right? Deloitte has some other data around performance management model. Basically, they're advocating for frequent check-ins and looking at the future, simple action-oriented questions. You can read through the slide here. It's a very strength-based approach. What can you do well? Let's amplify that. Where are your gaps? All right, let's spend a little bit of time on that. You think about Marcus Buckingham and some of his research around strength finders. All right, let's play with your strengths and really amp those up and help you be the most successful you in that role. The challenge is that not every role allows our employees to leverage their strengths. Well, let's help them find that. your managers have an opportunity to learn more about their people from my line of thinking if we get better conversations earlier on and help people be more accountable earlier on. So when you think about your managers, especially the less experienced managers, what approach do you think they're trying to take right now? It's something to chew on. I'm going to hedge a bet that most of them are modeling after their bosses that they've had in their past, good and bad, because they haven't seen any different. You think about as we grow up, we emulate our parents, we emulate our teachers, our role models. We look to them because there's things in them that we liked. Same thing on the in the workforce. You see a manager who treats people a certain way that you sort of jive with, you're going to treat people the same way. And this is what's happened over time. We set this expectation. Nobody wants to work anymore. Not true. They don't want to work for that person. That's the reality of it. The question comes down to is, what are you going to do about it? A, nothing. B, pass the buck on to somebody else or to some other time. Oh, we'll think about it another time down the road. Or are you going to start to build yourself some goals and some action-oriented items that are going to help these managers be a little bit more successful? If you want to think in terms of the 1% incremental growth, it gets bigger and bigger, day by day, week by week, month by month. You can't affect landscape changing by expecting people to change all their habits overnight. You got to pick a couple of things and help them get better at it. See some success, repeat, reward, and build on it. Right? So I've got a couple of case examples that we're going to talk through. And this is just to illustrate some of the point. I've got skill and will sort of conversations in and around there. And as I put these scenarios in front of you, I want you to think who has an impact on that. Right? So scenario number one, you've got a sales rep. Sales rep Bob, he's relatively decent performing 5-year employee. All in these three examples, they're all 5-year type employees. They're not brand new, but they also don't have gobs and gobs of experience. So Bob traditionally hits his sales metrics, and he goes over his monthly quotas pretty regularly for the most of his 5 years. But the last year, the market shifted. His numbers have started plateauing, and he's sort of sometimes hitting expectations, not always. He's no longer the above and beyond Bob. He's sort of the middle of the road average and sometimes a little under. And since his numbers have slipped, his year-end numbers are in danger. And related to that, his manager's numbers are in danger. So Bob's on the radar screen. Should he be? Hard for me to say. This is fictitious examples that we build up. So manager's getting impatient. Bob's no longer showing up as a star performer. And so what comes to light in your conversations with Bob's manager is that Bob doesn't fill out his reports on time. He doesn't turn his expense reports in when he's supposed to. And so it causes some lags in terms of approvals and getting the check back, because then Bob wants his money from, the AP team and so forth. He's not submitting his timesheets in a timely manner. And so you're having to harangue him back and forth. The manager's having to go after him saying, hey, get your timesheet in, put your PTO in, da, da, da. And so these little minor things that Bob's been doing for 5 years hasn't been a problem until his numbers start to suffer. Now he's on the chopping block, so to speak. Bob's manager's had it. He's fed up with it, comes to you, he wants to put him on a PIP. His numbers aren't where they need to be. Oh, and then by the way, his reports and blah, 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 everything that I just explained. Manager has the conversation. Bob's shocked. He's been a steady performer. He's having a down year. He expects a little bit more loyalty. You get into the conversation. You find out that Bob's manager has never said that the expense report and the timesheets were urgent, so he never made a big deal out of it. He didn't think it was important. And all of a sudden, all these 4 or 5 things are in his performance improvement plan, and he's expected to right the ship overnight. Otherwise, you know what? Your employment is at risk, and you could face further disciplinary action up to and including further termination of your employment. Da, 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 right? We know the language. So what's the core issue here? In my view, the manager didn't hold up expectations. They didn't do their part here. They didn't communicate along the way that the expense report piece, the timesheet report were really important. They're part of the fabric of doing the role 100%. He rewarded them and was happy to take the revenue along the way. So to me, this is as much on the manager. Yeah, Bob's got to perform. But if I've got somebody who's performed 4 years in a row and they're having a down year, I'm going to give them a little leeway. But that's me. But this is common in sales world, right? So example number 2, you got a project manager, right? They're in charge of this $2 million project pipeline. They've been on the job, this particular job. They've been with the company for 5 years, but they've been on this job for about 18 months. And so over the time that they've been in this new role, they've been charged with bringing in a number of projects. They haven't had a ton of training on this. Manager feels a little lost, doesn't feel confident going to their boss asking for help because they feel like they should know it and they're treated as if they should know it. And so as the year's coming to an end, Sue, who's our project manager, her boss is coming after her. She's saying, you're not looking like you're hitting your numbers. I just want, and they're communicating along the way. Just, this is serious. You got to hit your number. Otherwise, we're going to have to find some other options here at the end of the year. And so they've communicated along the way, there's some trouble coming, but not to the point where Sue feels like her job's in jeopardy, right? Eventually, month 18 comes along. Sue's surprised by the arrival of a PIP, hit your year-end goal, or you, again, face further disciplinary action, blah, blah, blah. So you in your HR role, you're unaware in the gap of training that Sue's basically told you, hey, I don't feel this was fair. I haven't been given this expectation. You're not super surprised at Sue's level of shock. That usually comes from everybody who gets put on one of these because we're not communicating. And you're questioning the manager, what the manager's been doing in terms of letting them know what they need to be doing. So again, is PIP worthy? Well, there's a performance expectation and Sue's not been hitting it. And it sounds like there's more conversations, more so than Bob's. But the manager has equal stake here. And they could have stepped in earlier and figured out, hey, what are your shortfalls? Where are you struggling most? Again, more conversations. Could the manager have been doing better? Third scenario, technician. They're responsible for gathering data, reviewing results, filing reports on a regular basis, and within certain intervals of time. Now, what's also in this is that this manager's on a special project. They're struggling with putting their reports in on time. They're seen taking long lunch breaks, sort of lackadaisically taking advantage of the fact they're the only one who knows how to do this. So they think their job's secure. No one's calling them out on putting the work in that everyone else is. They're not calling Joe out, who's our technician, out on, not filling in the data that they need to. There's also this part that Joe has friction with his manager, and the manager's avoiding conflict. So much so to the point that Joe's going to the boss's boss to go over his head and say, he's doing a bad job and I really should have that role and so forth. So just to cut that story piece short, there's some gaps of information, gaps of how to handle conflict. The manager is missing some skill components here, right? And we have the opportunity as HR to step in and help them, whether it's us helping directly or getting the right resources in play, right? There's a better way. And when we think about what our managers need most, more accountability, more training, and more practice. How critical is it for us to have the ability to give our people the kind of practice that they need? Managers don't get to see this in real time. It's stuff that happens all of a sudden. They've got an underperforming employee and they feel the need to push them out or push them up. Usually it's out in this example. So we have to look at, why aren't we fixing some of this? If we can spot some of these red flags earlier, which they all do, every conversation with a manager who's had an employee on a PIP, they say, oh, they've been doing this for months. There's no documentation. There's no record of this. Oh, well, I have it in emails and every excuse under the book. Right. Managers should be taught, if you start to see red flags, act on them, ask for help, get more training, help me role play with you so that we can prepare you for these conversations or help get other people involved to upskill that employee. Because I promise you, there's less money involved, less time involved in retraining an employee on certain performance areas. They're either going to see, I really don't fit in this role, or they're going to surprise you and start to model this success ratio that they need to be successful in the role. So as we look at what core skills do these managers need to become better people leaders, right? We have to have a baseline, right? And this is where part of your handout comes in. So in your handout, you have this nice little chart, gives you a rubric to play with, and we're going to dive into that, right? In order to know where we're going, it's sort of like having a map for a journey. You have to know where you're starting. That's base camp. And as we're climbing up the mountain, we need to know where we need to be at what intervals and what success looks like. And if we're not defining that, then we're not helping our managers out. So as we look at this rubric, and you can feel free to use this, the one modification I might suggest, this depends on your audience, is putting some metrics in here. So category 1, maybe it's conflict skills. Not yet evident, meaning there's little to no observable progress with this manager. They don't really do well with this. Or they start to emerge some skills, meaning they get the concept, they're just not being as consistent with it, and so on and so forth. You see developing, proficient, exemplary. You can tie some percentages to this. Does this 10% of the time, 25% of the time, 50% of the time, 75%, 100%. Another way to think of this rubric, not yet evident, means when you're talking to that manager and they give you this sort of blank stare like, huh? And you can go on down the line. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Developing, they have context, they have application. I know, I need to be more consistent with it. Proficient, got it, right? Not the fly ball person, but you get the phrase there. And then the exemplary ones, when they're really, really solid and they own it, they're teaching others how to apply that. And so as you think about that growth and skill in those gap areas, this is a great way to measure that, both for themselves as well as their stakeholders. Think of the 360 feedback. It doesn't need to be that robust, but you can take a look at what areas they need the most help with. And it could just be 3, right? And so in our example today, here's a fun one. I asked AI to kind of interpret how some of those rubrics looked in different generations. So the Gen X, that was me. So I typed in little no observation. That didn't change. The Gen Z, you're vibing with this new skill or concept. You see the vision and you've made the initial attempt to change. The piece that got me was the vibe component, right? You get different language that you're just not used to seeing every day and you feel like not cool enough to talk that way. Millennials demonstrates a consistent understanding and application of new behaviors and some context, so on and so forth. But it's fun to kind of plant that seed. You've got managers who are a different generation. Sometimes they're the boomer speaking to the millennial. Sometimes it's the millennial talking to the boomer. Factor that in your conversation. How is this person receiving the information? Not just the words, but the intent. We know that our millennials and our Gen Zs, they have a different response to things. So factor that into your conversations. So as we think about our base camp, we think about what does better look like? How are we going to measure it? And let's get them there. So as you follow the worksheet, you have the rubric. There are 3 columns. So if you think about a manager and practical applications that's on your team, what does that manager struggle with? What are some of their biggest gaps? Jot those down. Take a minute, just think about one person in particular. You can put it in pencil. Maybe it's not somebody today, but maybe it's somebody from the past and you have some examples to play with. I'll give you a minute to kind of write in 3 areas for growth that you can see. You've had conversations with their director or their boss or their company owner and so on and so forth, depending on the size of your organization. You have an idea from their performance reviews, what they struggle with, what they're doing well with, and what they're not. And so jot those things down. And you can funnel in the different check boxes of where they fall. Not yet evident, emerging, developing, proficient, exemplary, right? So as you write down those 3 biggest gaps, I want you to think about page 2 of your worksheet. What are a couple of areas that we can practice with them? And as you get to the middle, what's the cadence that we can be working with them on? So start to write this down. So if you have somebody who's got conflict resolution skills, role playing is a great opportunity for you to have that conversation about, all right, how do you do this? How do I have better conversations with employees? And how do I make sure that I'm giving you the type of scenarios that you're going to be used to, or you're going to expect to see, both best case scenario and worst case scenario. And so from there, sorry, I've got a dog who needs attention. That's what you're seeing a nose and an ear for. as we build in the cadence, we want to revisit these conversations live, meaning it's not a one and done. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to them. Plan out multiple intervals where you can have conversations with them about how does this sound? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And schedule those things out. Don't say, hey, I'll look at my calendar. You all have cell phones. You all have calendars on them. Map out, pick a date, pick a time, make it happen, right? And so that's that cadence piece. And then in the bottom of that second page of the worksheet, you're going to see some scenario ideas. You may have scenarios in mind that fit this scenario based on prior conversations, either within this organization or in past life. And if you don't, I know you know lots of other people in this HR field. Hey, I've got this scenario. I need some help. Can you give me an example of when you had one of these conversations, or when one of your managers had one of these conversations? I promise you, it'll be a lot easier when you have some real stories to pull from. Or, hey, my friend told me about this one time where they did this and that, and this worked for them. It may not be the exact solution, but it's going to give you enough context to connect with this manager. Okay. All right. What if they resist, right? Knowledge is power. Maybe they like it. Maybe they don't. You definitely will run into some of this. We have some stick in the mud managers. You know it. I know it. It's a reality. Some people will resist you quietly. Some people will resist you out loud. It's going to be hard to get through. Well, in your third page, there's some conversation starters. I wrote it in your handout. Things like, I've noticed when you're under stress or duress, you tend to do X and Y and Z. I wanted to see if I could chat with you and talk through some of those scenarios with you. Or you can kind of walk through, when this happens, it seems like it's causing a level of discomfort or an annoyance. I can see it on your face. And I know if I'm reading that, the rest of your team's reading that. Let's try and work with that, because that's going to send people away. Instead of having an open door policy, people are going to be like, I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. So we get to start to spot what some of these gaps are, and help them envision some of these conversation starters to get them further along in the process. It's just a jump start. And maybe you save some of these starters, one for each conversation, you make a list of them, and you have some starting points to keep things moving forward. Again, build in that cadence every other week, every 3 weeks. Don't let it go too far out, because they're going to say, I'm busy today. Nope. That's where I got this whole stack of stickers. If you can see it, right? Nope. Go fish, right? You don't get that option, right? The excuses is, let's wait till this comes up again and then work on it. When you don't train for things, you're ill prepared for them. If you don't train to do deadlifts, you're going to hurt your back, hurt your glutes, hurt your quads, hurt all sorts of things. When you don't train and practice things, you're going to perform poorly, or something else is going to break. So when you hear things like, let's wait till it comes up, let's talk about it at some point, you know what to do with this, right? Don't take those excuses. You're like, yeah, in my experience, when I've heard that, nothing happens. So let's pick a date and time. We're going to put it on the calendar. Don't ask them. You got to drive this part of it, right? When they say that never happens to us, it never happens to you until it happens to you. And then what? Better to practice some of these scenarios, even if they never come up. They will, and then when they come to you with these problems again, nope, go fish. Like, we're not taking that. We're going to take proactive measures here. This is going to be our philosophy, and part of our core value is to learn and grow and be there for our people. And if we're not treating them the right way in all aspects, then we're not doing them right. So practice sounds, there's some of those examples here in the middle of that last page. How do you think that conversation went, Joe? Have Joe give himself a rating, right? And when you're going through these practice models, how does that sound? I sort of flubbed that up. Can we try that again? You know, it's a great example. Pretend like you're on a podcast. Would you want that to be aired out in the airwaves on Spotify, on Amazon? No, let's retake that. Let's do another recording. Let's walk through that. Don't actually record it. That's probably a bad idea. But you can pretend like you're in a podcast studio. Let's get it so it sounds right. Don't give them the answer. Let them come up with the answer and then guide them along. All right, let's try a little bit more positivity. Let's try a little bit less positivity, because there's some people who have way too much energy, like me, right? Then after they've graded themselves and explained why, Ask them what some other people in their organization, some of their stakeholders would say. You don't have to go out and ask those folks, but you can give them an example, sort of the self-review. What would other people say about you? It's like when you interview and say, what would your boss say about you? Oh, they would love me. How would they say about your deadline management? They love me. Get a real honest answer. They're going to be more critical of themselves than anybody else will. And then they can ask what you would grade them. And you have some balancing points here. And take notes on that. Because now, in a month, 2 months, 3 months, hey, your conflict resolution skills were at a 3 months ago when we started this conversation. Now, you're at a 4. That's awesome. I don't need you to be a 10 tomorrow. I need you to be better than you were yesterday. And I need you to continue to grow in that area, right? And you can also ask things like, well, what's one thing you would have done differently? How would you have approached that differently? How would that sound? Give them a couple of different scenarios. What if the employee resists? What if they welcome it? All sorts of different things. And again, more conversation starters in here. How, if you had to help them self-assess themselves on how they're ensuring they're communicating goals to their employees, are the goals realistic? There's a whole bunch of stuff in here to start some of these conversations. And you can lean into some of that theory X, theory Y, but you get them talking with these open-ended questions. Don't give them any of the closed-ended ones, the ones that end in yes, no, right? Think Roy Kent who grunts, right? No, you got to get them talking. Self-assess, right? Once they're very aware of themselves, and they just don't want to talk about it, all the learning and magic will happen, right? So I'll give you this context, right? You see the daughter and the father, he's teaching her to brush her teeth. Because what happens if you put her in the bathroom by yourself? Brush your teeth, dear. What's happening to that toothbrush? You know as well as I do. It looks like a mangled mess. Any of you that had a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, even 6 or 7, they just chew on that thing. And you're wondering, I just bought that last week. How does it look like it's 4 months old? You have to give them context. Brush front and back, circles, this and that and the other. You have to have real conversations with them to make sure that they know what they're good at and where they're struggling. So you have to ask yourself in these, I put some prompts here, what are conversations that your managers are having that you're sure they're having and doing a really good job at? And what are they comfortable with? What are they not comfortable with? You've got to build some assessment in here. How are you going to measure that? What would you say here? How does that sound? What did you say to Susie? And really get the word for word answer, not the, well, I sort of said this, or probably, or kind of in the middle. Don't get that. Have them recite that, because they should be reflecting on those, right? How are you getting prepared for the inevitable? So with that, there isn't really the forum here for questions, because I know there's a little bit of a delay, but I want to thank you for spending time with me and talking about how you can get your managers in a better state, how you can move away from putting those performance improvement plans in place, which are very last minute, last resort sort of things, and getting in with these employee groups at the 3-month mark, at the 6-month mark, at the 9-month mark. Don't wait for these conversations with the new employees. Help them along. When the red flags start popping up, even if they're yellow, let's start working with them. Let's retrain folks. Because as much as that failure is on that employee, and I say failure loosely, I don't necessarily look at all failure as bad. There's learning moments. But that lack of success on the employee's part is as much of the manager's responsibility as it is the employee. And ultimately, we have a skin in that game too, meaning we know our manager's strengths and gaps. And if we let that continue, that's on us. There's a big missed opportunity here. If we can get ahead of the game, do more manager development work, help them be better prepared for things, we all win. That number of performance improvement plans shrinks dramatically. And the folks that do land there know it's coming. There's no questions about it. They understand they're underperforming. Some of them may even self-select to move elsewhere. Maybe you have an opportunity to move them into another role along that time where you can start to see, hey, you have really good organizational skills. You just can't sell. All right, let me get you in a different role where you can project manage instead of sell things. You have some more time to play with to kind of identify strengths and where somebody fits within an organization. So here's my contact information. If you'd like to reach out, I'd love to speak with you, help you out, give you different scenarios. I have a QR code that's going to take you to this slide deck, slightly different version. I don't have all the Legos in there, but it gives you the main pieces. It also gives you the worksheet, as well as a couple of other resources that I put together that you may find useful. There's also Spotify link to this meeting should have been a podcast. It's a great show that my colleague Tom Horn and I started up a couple of months ago. And if you want to hear some workplace conversations, we're on the Work Defined Network. And there's a lot of great voices on there that you may be interested in if you're a podcaster. And if not, give us a whirl. With that, I thank you for your time, and I appreciate you listening into my take on why pips should be put in the grave. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.